Global terror networks are not born in caves. They are built slowly, patiently, across borders, bank accounts, ideologies, and broken states. What the world often sees as random violence is usually the final stage of a long process that began years earlier, quietly, far from the explosion itself. Every terror network starts with a grievance, a war lost, a land occupied, a community humiliated. But grievance alone does not create global terror. Millions suffer injustice. Very few build international killing machines. Something else must intervene. That something is organization. Modern terror networks operate like shadow states. They raise money, recruit manpower, spread ideology, manage logistics, control territory, and conduct foreign operations. None of this happens accidentally. It requires systems, it requires protection, and often it requires state tolerance or state failure. Funding is the bloodstream of terror. Without money, ideology dies quickly. Terror groups do not survive on donations alone. They diversify revenue like corporations. Some tax territory they control. Some smuggle oil, drugs, antiquities, or weapons. Some kidnap for ransom. Others receive funds through charities, front organizations, or sympathetic donors who never meet the killers they finance. Money moves invisibly. Cash couriers, Hawala networks, shell companies, cryptocurrency. Conflict zones become financial black holes where tracking stops. Once funds enter these systems, accountability disappears. But money alone does not radicalize. Ideology provides justification. Terror ideologies simplify the world into enemies and believers. They reduce complex political failures into moral warfare. They promise dignity through violence and meaning through martyrdom. Ideology is rarely original. It borrows selectively. Religious texts are fragmented, history is rewritten, victimhood is amplified, fear is weaponized. Leaders frame violence as defense, even when it is aggression. Recruitment targets vulnerability. Refugees, prisoners, displaced youth, the unemployed, the humiliated. Terror networks offer identity when society offers rejection. They replace belonging with obedience. Training completes the transformation. Camps teach weapons, discipline, and loyalty. More importantly, they erase doubt. Violence becomes normalized. Killing becomes necessary. Humanity becomes conditional. Global terror networks expand by exploiting chaos. Failed states provide space. Weak borders provide access. Corruption provides passage. Every collapsed institution becomes an opportunity. State involvement is rarely direct and often denied. Few governments openly fund terror groups, but many tolerate them. Some use them as proxies. Others ignore them as long as violence stays external. Strategic blindness becomes complicity. States sometimes believe they can control terror actors. History shows they cannot. Once armed and radicalized, groups pursue their own agendas. Former assets become future threats. Cold War history offers lessons repeatedly ignored. Militants trained for one war often migrate to another. Weapons distributed for short-term advantage circulate for decades. Blowback is not accidental, it is structural. Media amplifies terror far beyond its numbers. Fear multiplies impact. A single attack reshapes policy. Terror groups understand spectacle. Violence becomes communication. Civilians become messages. Counterterrorism often focuses on strikes rather than systems. Leaders are killed, networks adapt, funding shifts, ideology survives. Each attack justifies harsher security, which sometimes feeds recruitment further. Borders lose meaning. Fighters move from conflict to conflict, Afghanistan to Iraq, Syria to Africa, Yemen to Europe. Terror becomes global not because ideology spreads universally, but because instability does. Local grievances globalize, international agendas localize. The result is hybrid warfare, where terror, insurgency, crime, and politics merge into one ecosystem. What makes global terror networks resilient is not strength, but adaptability. They decentralize, they franchise, they inspire rather than command. Lone actors replace organized cells. Responsibility diffuses. Defeating terror militarily is possible. Eliminating terror permanently is harder, because terror feeds on unresolved injustice, poor governance, and endless war. Every time a state collapses, a terror network studies the ruins. Every time civilians are abandoned, recruiters arrive. Every time peace fails, ideology fills the gap. Global terror networks are not monsters from nowhere. They are mirrors reflecting international failure. They expose the cost of wars without plans, alliances without accountability, and power without responsibility. Understanding terror means following money, not just bombs. Understanding ideology means examining politics, not just religion. Understanding state involvement means confronting uncomfortable truths about interests over values. The world fights terror loudly, but enables it quietly. And until the systems that sustain terror are dismantled, financial, political, and ideological, new networks will rise, even as old ones fall. The story does not end with understanding how terror networks are built. It becomes darker when we look at how they are sustained, manipulated, and sometimes quietly protected by the very systems that claim to be fighting them. State involvement in global terror networks rarely looks like official orders or signed documents. It looks like silence. It looks like selective blindness. It looks like borders left open at convenient moments and closed when narratives change. It looks like intelligence agencies choosing which extremists are threats and which are assets. Many governments discover terror groups before the public ever hears their names. Intelligence reports warn early. Patterns are visible, camps are identified, funding trails are traced. Yet action is delayed. Why? Because in geopolitics, enemies of enemies are often tolerated. Sometimes they are quietly supported. Proxy logic is simple and dangerous. If a militant group weakens a rival state, it becomes useful. If it bleeds an adversary without risking direct war, it becomes strategic. The assumption is always the same. Control now, contain later. That assumption almost always fails. History shows this repeatedly. Fighters trained for one conflict migrate to another. Ideology mutates, loyalty shifts, groups outgrow their sponsors. What begins as leverage becomes liability. What was once deniable becomes undeniable. Some states provide logistical corridors. Others allow fundraising under the cover of charities. Some tolerate radical preaching as long as it points outward. Others release extremists from prisons during instability, believing chaos can be redirected. Each decision seems tactical. Together, they create global terror ecosystems. Counterterrorism strategies often deepen the problem. Drone strikes kill leaders, but create martyrs. Raids disrupt cells, but radicalize families. Mass surveillance alienates communities whose cooperation is essential. Security hardens while trust erodes. Prisons become incubators. Overcrowded cells mix criminals, radicals, and the angry young. Networks form behind bars. Ideology sharpens. Upon release, recruits emerge more committed than before. Online space accelerates everything. Terror propaganda no longer needs territory. It needs attention. Algorithms reward outrage. Graphic violence spreads faster than nuance. Lone actors radicalize without ever meeting a handler. Inspiration replaces instruction. This decentralization makes terror harder to defeat. There is no single headquarters to destroy, no leader whose death ends the movement. Ideas travel lighter than weapons and cross borders faster than armies. Global responses remain fragmented. Intelligence is shared selectively. Allies disagree on definitions. One country's terrorist is another's bargaining chip. Sanctions are uneven. Enforcement inconsistent. Meanwhile, the underlying conditions persist. War zones remain unresolved. Refugee populations grow. Youth unemployment rises. Authoritarian repression closes peaceful channels for dissent. Each factor feeds recruitment. Terror networks exploit moral contradictions. They point to civilian casualties, to double standards, to forgotten conflicts. Hypocrisy becomes propaganda. Every inconsistency strengthens their narrative. The future of global terror will not look like the past. Large centralized groups are easier to detect. Smaller, ideologically aligned networks are harder. Terror will blend further with crime, cyber operations, and information warfare. States face a choice they often avoid: address root causes or manage symptoms, invest in governance or enforce, build legitimacy or expand surveillance. None of these are easy. All require patience. Most lack political reward. Global terror networks survive because they sit at the intersection of fear, power, and failure. They are sustained not only by belief, but by opportunity. Remove the opportunity and ideology weakens. Preserve it and violence adapts. The uncomfortable truth is that terror is not an external virus attacking a healthy system. It is a symptom of a system under strain. It thrives where states collapse, where wars linger, where justice feels unreachable. The world will continue to kill terrorists. It will continue to name new groups. It will declare victories. But unless funding pipelines are dismantled, proxy games abandoned, and political grievances addressed, the cycle will repeat. New names will replace old ones. New flags will rise. New recruits will believe they are fighting the first war of their kind. They will not be. Global terror networks are not defeated by force alone. They end when violence stops being useful to states, profitable to intermediaries, and meaningful to the desperate. Until then, terror will remain global, not because ideology is universal, but because failure is shared.